Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So it seems like we have a hot topic these days, which is critical infrastructure protection from cyber attacks. We discussed this topic during a previous webinar, but and because it was such an interesting topic, and we had so many sort of discussion points, we thought that we would arrange a more focused and targeted webinar today with a more focused panel. Um, we have experts today on board, and I would hand the floor over to them so they could introduce themselves, and then we'll deep dive into the topic. So, Ahmad, starting with you first.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. Thank you very much, Sahar, for giving me a chance. My name is Ahmad Javed, and I'm CEO of Cytellite, working in the Middle East for the past more than a couple of decades, offering digital privacy, cybersecurity, and cyber resilience services.
Thank you, Osama.
My name is Sayyid Osama Ali. I'm heading Information Security Strategic Projects and Digital Transformation at HBL. Uh, Before that, I used to be with the big four firms. I've been in the cybersecurity domain for the last 2 decades. So, this is now the brief summary.
Welcome. Finally, Hafeez.
Hi everyone, my name is Hafeez and I am CIO at Sapphire Mills. I have 20 years of experience in information technology across Middle East, North Africa, and Asia Pacific region. Nice
Thank you
to
for
meet you
joining us
guys.
today. Thank you. I think before we sort of discuss the specific questions for today, Osama, you mentioned something which triggered my interest, which is that you've been involved in the sector for 2 decades.
Yes.
What changes have you seen over the 2 decades? And I think maybe you would want to mention the recent sort of mobile outage incident that occurred in the US. I think it was yesterday or the day before. So just
Yes.
briefly, if we could start with you.
Right. Well, if I talk about it, even not 2 decades back, let's say if I talk about a decade back, so if the cyber attacks, the threat landscape is not the one that we have today. So previously, the attacks are generally, the systems are compromised. Someone actually hack your systems and launch the attack, and very briefly, the accounts got compromised, and these kind of attacks, or a particular organization, their particular segment, their computer systems got hacked. But now the threat landscape is completely changed. Since with the evolution of data protection, or the importance of the data that is being you can say data is the new gold actually. So with the evolution of this theory, we can say that data breaches and are getting more common these days, or the service outage actually. Linking it with the topic of today is like the attack on the critical infrastructure, the cyber attacks on the critical infrastructure. We have recently seen a couple of attacks which happen in the local industry as well and globally as well. Uh, a couple of days back, or even yesterday, there was an attack in US, which was not actually declared yet, but that resulted in a outage of the cellular industry. Like the cell phones were off, and you don't have the networks available. Even there was an outage some time back related to the power generation companies. So, since with the evolution of OT and cybersecurity, you can say these systems are actually manufacturing systems, the power generation, power grids, they're all connected with the uh, technology. So, with the attack on these infrastructure, you have the national level damage, or you can say the impact on the national level, like your services may not be available, your critical infrastructure would be down, or maybe the data that is actually hosted on the critical infrastructure, the national level data. Let's say if we take the example of Pakistan, we have Nadra. So God forbid if these kind of attacks happen, so that national level data of the people got compromised. So the evolution that I've seen is like previously, it's like the impact or the intensity or the dependency of on the technology was not that high, but with the evolution of technology and the emerging threat landscape, this impact getting higher, and we're having more and more attacks these days.
That's a very valid point that with technological advancement, the risk and threats also increase. And I think you've answered my first question, which was going to be what constitutes critical infrastructure in the context of cybersecurity and why is its protection essential? Ahmed, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, sure. In the context of cybersecurity, generally, when we refer this critical infrastructure, what we meant with whatever covers within the definition of operational technology. This is the technical term which we usually, as a cybersecurity professionals, we refer to. The operational technology is all about we what we consider as part of industrial technology, including the electric grids, power generators, healthcare industry, telecommunication, which is basically outside the scope of general IT. So when we are talking about OT space, cybersecurity professionals generally are required to use a more enhanced and more sophisticated sort of tools which can be used within the OT space. So operational technology demands a more the devious kind of efforts or more sophisticated efforts in order to protect the infrastructure from cyber attacks that are not the normal strategies or normal technological components which we can use within the IT space to protect them. So let's consider the example of a telecommunication network that where all the the cellular phones are connected with the satellites. So there's a satellite communication as well as the communication among the RBS radio broadcast systems, and then eventually the communication channel reach back to the devices, which is mobile cell phones as well. So those communication channels are generally used a different set of protocols and different set of signaling mechanisms which require a different set of tools to read the data through and so forth. So in order to secure all that infrastructure, we need a separate set of considerations from a cybersecurity point of view to go and adopt that measures which are applicable to that environment from a security perspective. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Moving on to Hafeeza. Hafeeza, would you like to add anything? You mentioned you have a diverse sort of background in Middle East and the African region. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you. So for example, if we talk about cybersecurity and the critical infrastructure, I think some of the industries that Ahmad mentioned, like telecommunication, energy, and even the transportation and healthcare, I think they all depend now on and they rely heavily on information technology. And there are, and when you talk about information technology for these sectors, I think there are many interconnected systems to operate to run successfully the operations. So the protection of the critical infrastructure is essential for I believe several reasons. And if you talk about my experience, I can even see that you know uh, a problem in the attack on the transportation system in, for example, Europe or Dubai, for you know it can create issues in the whole transport management that is happening, because they rely heavily on the local transport systems, and uh, uh, those are based on information technology they are running. I mean, so I believe that it has an impact on national level. So when you talk about if there are people working to grab something, or not grab something, and to penetrate into some entity which is taking care of the public safety, or the national security, I think this is also a big threat.
I
Okay,
would like
thank
to
you.
add something in this part, even what Hafiz and Ahmad Saab said earlier. If you say, in terms of controls, the implementation or the solution that has to be differentiated from the traditional cybersecurity landscape, coming towards the critical infrastructure, talking about the, you can say we're talking about the transportation. So let's take an example of the airline industry. If the plane is flying at a 7,000 feet altitude, and someone actually compromised the frequency of it, and you lost the communication from the your control tower, so that may create a bigger disaster. So by implementing controls over there, you cannot put just simple controls that were used to be implemented some time back, but you have like you have to actually secure the particular frequencies. You have to actually test. You should know actually how to actually test those frequencies, how you can actually compromise them. So these kind of sophistication, these kind of attacks, coming landscape or emerging landscape is now actually looking in these areas as well. Like previously people don't think about these areas, that these kind of things can happen, but now with the evolution of OT, these things are actually the emerging areas of threats.
Thank you. You've actually, this was going to be my second question, and I think you've touched upon it. That what are some common types of cyber threats faced by critical infrastructure sectors? Ahmed, would you like to add to this? I mean, you've actually mentioned a very critical one, which is aviation. But Ahmed, would you like to add and elaborate?
Sure. First, here, before we answer this question, first we need to understand that such attacks, which are on critical infrastructure, will be generally classified as critical. Why? Because it directly have an impact on human lives. We consider aviation, as Osama mentioned, healthcare, traffic systems, or any of the larger state managed operational systems. The most important one, which I generally consider, is our the communication system. So communication is generally happening through the internet as well as through different means. One common example which we use is the mobile cell phones, and mobile cell phones have its own vulnerabilities within that. And it's been said that the each system has its own the different measures to consider, which we call it as from a cybersecurity point of view, we refer it as a separate attack vectors, considering that the threat landscape applied within the space of that operational technology. So these are few of the examples of the critical infrastructure which are generally managed by the governments or the at least the states. But when it comes to consider the protection measures for such infrastructures, that's a shared responsibility. So that we can discuss in a later the discussion though. But one thing which I would like to highlight is that the new evolving area in the space of this one of the new victim, I would say, for the attacks in the considering the critical infrastructure is the IoT space. And biggest example for IoT is the smart cities. Your automated vehicles, and drones, which are as well used for, let's suppose, rescue operations and all that, are similarly applicable or considered in the attack space. So those have been attacked as well, and should be considered, because one thing is common among all of these is anything which basically gets affected through these attacks, there is a direct impact on human lives. That's why it's so critical to consider today. And that's why it's taking a lot of attention from the not only from the cyber professionals, from the governments as well.
Very
Ahmed Sir,
interesting.
very well highlighted. I mean, like, I'm sorry to chip in between. The healthcare part that you've mentioned, I used to visit the Black Air and these conferences earlier as well. This year, I've noticed that they have actually demonstrated the real time, you can say, the healthcare particular domain. let's say people were actually the you can say the bug bounty hunters. They're actually testing the systems, they're actually trying to compromise the systems. But there was a total area for the medical domain. You can say these ventilators, the healthcare systems, they all are placed over there, and they were just demonstrating that, since these systems are actually connected through IoT, so how you can say the security concerns are also associated with these systems, because since they're connected to the internet or any network, so they can also get an impact and resulting in the human life impact. So this is again a sensitive area.
Hafisa, would you like to add to this before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, sure. So when you talk about the common types, I believe ransomware is very common, uh, and maybe I would not be able to name some organization, but it is becoming very common nowadays. One of the biggest utility company in Pakistan even faced this challenge like a couple of years back. So ransomware is basically is a type of malware that encrypts data on a victim system, and then they demand payment. And people who have faced, they share stories like whenever they are opening the system or a server in the morning, so only a notepad is coming where one email is mentioned just to contact on that email. So basically, I think this is one of the targets. I believe if it's not only to the critical organization in the country, but as well as some private companies with a bigger footprint. This is one of the type, and then the very basic one, if you ask from me, I think it's phishing. It's very easy to to have phishing attack. I mean, creating deceptive emails and messages to trick some individuals, because I believe in any organization, the most difficult part to control is to control the employee. And because that is the easiest target that anyone can get the access to the company's network. So I think phishing is also very common. uh, and inside threats, if you ask from me, then the employee is is the insider. So because
Hafisa,
employee,
it seems like
yeah.
your organization, or sort of you've come across similar examples. Again, a very interesting example. Um, I'll move on to a sort of a more sort of simpler layman question. How is how is cybersecurity or cyber attack on critical infrastructure different from attacks on other sectors in a country? I think we've sort of touched upon this, but let's explore this in more detail so that those who are listening to us become more aware of the distinction between cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and on other sectors. So the floor is open. Anybody who would like to answer this?
Yeah, I will just start with it, if you allow me. So we are talking about how it differs basically. So you see, the attacks on critical infrastructure can have far-reaching consequences. That is sometimes beyond financial losses or data breaches. So, for example, disruption to critical infrastructure like we talk about energy, transportation, healthcare, those directly impact public. Okay, so that has an impact on national level, and it can impact the economy as well. For example, an attack on an energy grid, you know, could result in power outage, right? While attack on transportation system could lead to the accidents or delay in significant consequences of public safety and the commerce as well.
Ahmad or Osama, if you would like to add anything before we move on to the next question.
Um, as Hafeez very rightly, highlighted few examples of the cyber attacks, which are very common, considering the attack vectors which are, commonly used these days. But one thing which I would like to highlight here, considering the critical infrastructure of the operational technology, as because of the evolution of the technology, our attacks are become more targeted, more devious, that basically can bring down any of the state level of system as well. If imagine the traffic system, the signaling goes down. So the similarly, the attack vectors are very different than the general IT attack in the attacks in the IT space, considering the phishing part or the ransomware and all that. Because generally, the malware which has been used in the Ukraine war, which is called as PETIA, is basically an OT malware. That's basically a ransomware malware which was used to attack that company, which was taking care of their energy grid. So the energy grid is usually the malware, which is only for that purpose. Is the Stuxnet, if you might have heard about it. So that even the malware for that operation technologies are specific to that space now, which talks in using that level of protocols, because if we go back to our very foundational sciences, which in the computer science, which has been taught about in the networking course, is the OSI model for the IT using the TCP/IP protocol. That's not the same OSI model which we use in the OT space. They are, instead of seven, they are 9 layers, which defines an additional two for packetting and converging. So that defines the layer of IT and OT convergence as well, because generally we are sitting behind the computers, connect using the panels to see all the thresholds and the readings which you are receiving, but the backend, the computers are connected with the PLC boards, and then which are further connected with the operational plants or something. If you're talking about an oil and gas production plant or refining plant, if you want to assess what is the reading of the productivity as of today, the way it works is that the sensors which are applied there basically assess the viscosity of that crude fluid which is flowing from there. And based on that viscosity reading, all that complex formulas happen and give us in a very lavish, colorful, the dashboard, the reading is. So from a cybersecurity point of view, what we need to do here as a hacker, if what I would do, I will focus on that sensor and misfeed the information there to lead the whole process wrong. That actually happens if someone wants to create a blast within the power grid. I just need to connect with the PLCs and start misfeeding the information, so the voltage goes up and down and it becomes hot, and eventually the fire starts. So imagine if it's that simple, it will start happening every day and night. But since there is not only the cyber element here to consider, when we talk about critical infrastructure, there are three elements of it. One is, of course, the operational technology, as we said, the operational plant, and then there is the general IT, you can say, which we generally use to leverage to connect. A third thing is the operational or the human element of it as well. Now, OT systems or the critical infrastructures in most of the cases are not actually connected with the internet. So most of the cyber attacks are not possible directly from the internet or sitting at home. Like, when I cannot launch an attack on a Ukrainian power grid sitting here. So I need to first physically breach or define that my strategy in order to deliver my payload physically in that vicinity where I can reach out the systems, and then I can start reading it. So eventually, I actually tried drawing that picture the way we do or launch these attacks. So eventually, the impact is so negatively adverse. We can lose the human lives. So if we take an example of the blackout which happens on in US several years back, when the power they lost the power electric power supply to the big cities and states. So imagine the hospitals where the doctors were in the middle of the surgeries. Imagine the people who got stuck in the elevators. Imagine people who were in the planes. So even airport ports lost the electricity. So the communication is. So many airplanes got accidents as well. So impact is unimaginably adverse. So it's really serious.
No, you really instilled the gravity of cyber attacks and the necessity to sort of protect critical infrastructure. I mean, it's almost like I hope nobody who's listening to this gets any wrong idea. It's almost like, and no wonder, we have so many books and movies and sort of documentaries and such suspense thrillers on this topic. But very interesting examples. And we've mentioned the Ukrainian war a couple of times. I mean, one is actually sort of breaching cybersecurity, and then, or Ahmad, you mentioned that when there was a power outage in the US a few years ago, everything came to a standstill. But on the other hand, and I think I'm slightly digressing, on the other hand, we're actually seeing proper wars being carried out by one country against another, and just bombing of hospitals, etc. So I mean, I think you've sort of managed to capture for all of us how critical it is to protect infrastructure from cyber attacks. Osama, do you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
No, just a quick one. As it was explained in a very much detail, like the these days, these are the you can say the nation-led cyber attacks as well. Like you've mentioned the wars. So basically, you can say if a particular nation is targeting to another nation, or maybe different activist group, they actually join forces together. They actually attack on a different nation. So yes, we came across different instances even in our country as well, in different sectors, where when you actually go back to for the investigation part, so you actually come across that it's actually a consortium of different hacktivist groups who actually collaborated and launched attack on particular critical infrastructure.
No, you're right, and I think we've Ahmed, because Ahmed went into such interesting detail, that I think we've also addressed my fourth question, which was going to be the potential consequences of a successful cyber attack on critical infrastructure. I think Ahmed sort of gave the example of the power outage in the US. Osama, you mentioned some, and I don't want to go into specifics as far as our sort of country is concerned, but Hafeez Saab, or if anybody would like to add on consequences, and I think what Ahmed has been repeatedly saying during today's discussion is that the worst possible consequence can be the loss of human life. I mean, nothing can be worse than that. Um, and we've also sort of touched upon the economy or the country coming to a standstill, hospitals not having power, being stuck in elevators, or sort of aviation accidents. So I think we've pretty much covered potential consequences, unless anybody wants to add anything else before I move on.
Yes, I would like to. Would like to share the example of how devious it can be if we really imagine that this is happening as the time we speak as well. It can be definitely more damaging to a nation than only few human lives as well. I mean, I would like to quote an example of Iranian nuclear facility, which is, of course, a very sensitive a national level of the asset which governments would even like give away or sacrifice several lives to protect it. So as I said, like in order to strategize the attacks, we need to consider these elements of human related processes as well as the technology element, especially the operation technology. And of course, such a sensitive facility never ever, by even by mistake, can be exposed to the internet. So how on the face of earth actually the person who came up with an attack strategy was, when I studied about it, I was like amazed, because hackers are generally a species of appreciation. We should appreciate them for their out of the box thinkers.
Absolutely, they They are intelligent species. They're different breed of intelligent species.
So how they launched, it's more interesting to know that how they launched that attack of that facility where about almost in the perimeter of 100 kilometers, not even one bird can fly on that, even in the airspace. So what they did was that they dropped biscuit size of robots, which basically was dropped down in form of biscuits around in the facility, which crawled as the insects into the facility, and one was been able to reach to a computer where it injected itself in the USB port where they transform the malware. And the malware does nothing other than just misfed those sensors of nuclear facility, which result in few hours in the blast after few hours, because that cooling system has to basically there's a temperature which needs to be maintained all the time is so critical in that nuclear fusion process in order to maintain that. So that only the misfeeding of the information which resulted in the blast, and it took several years to investigate and found the reason why and how it happened and so forth. And how many billions of dollars of a government lost, and the strategic advantage now US got over the other countries. Similarly, that happens in other countries as well. So this is one of the example that yes, indeed, it can be even more devious than loss of several lives as well.
It sounds very sinister. I think that brings me very sort of that dovetails to my next question, which is what are the primary challenges in securing critical infrastructure against cyber attacks? I mean, we've spoken about what cyber attack is, what critical infrastructure is, what could be the consequences. And before we move on to, or perhaps we should start with how can we secure our critical infrastructure from cyber attacks? So let's address this first, and then we'll come to the challenges.
Well, I'll reverse it. As you've said that, I'll just talk about a particular challenge first, because considering the restricting ourselves to the underdeveloped nations. Uh, there's always a question in my mind that whatever the solutions that we are actually using to protect our critical infrastructure, they're generally based on some, you can say, from Western world or some other countries. Considering geopolitical situation, we always won't have good relations with some of the different countries. Uh, whose products are actually we are using to protect our critical infrastructure. So I asked this particular question with someone in the defense sector as well, that how we are actually making sure that this particular infrastructure that we are using to secure our system is not actually infected. Or because, for example, if a particular firewall that we are using, how come we know that it contains a malware, or it contains a loophole or something like that, that actually exfiltrating our data or something like that? So I believe the answer that I got it from an expert was like, the nations that are actually mature enough in this domain is that they're investing a lot more on research and development. Like, whatever the technologies that you're adopting, you need to actually have a good research facilities available at your end. You actually try to build your infrastructure, but if not, you should have a good testing facilities, so that the infrastructure that you are actually onboarding to protect your environments, you have the right facilities available to test them and to make sure that they're error free, they're bug free, so that you can actually deploy them for your security. So this is something I believe. Amasa, would you like to add something in this?
Just before Ahmed sort of takes the floor, Osama, you've made a very valid point. R&D, I think R&D is very important, but R&D also requires a significant amount of investment, and
True.
resources, and especially financial resources, need to be devoted towards this aspect. So,
Right.
please, Ahmed, let's continue with you, and then we can move to Hafeez.
Sure. See, one thing is very common, considered as a key difference between IT and OT spaces, that having a test environment. The limitation of OT environment is that it's really so costly, and environment technology, such as if you consider about one operational plant. In order to test something on that, we need to have the test environment similar, if not same, similar kind of a plant, which of course in most of the cases businesses wouldn't be able to afford. So the testing is a really one of the the difficult task in the OT space, because testing something in the production environment is of course is not advisable, and having the test environment is about the all that cost factor, which is very difficult. Second challenge I would like to highlight important here is that most of the OT technology for which is used in the infrastructure, critical infrastructure, is is vendor based, such as we name it like Schneider or Honeywell and all that. So most of the equipment is vendor designed and manufactured. So they themselves only be- can produce the required patches of certain vulnerabilities if have been identified or found. So that's why organizations are very much dependent on the key players in the OT space, such as Schneider or Honeywell and so forth. And of course, they are trying to monopolize that factor of using it as a weakness on to the charging phenomenally high prices in order to produce only the security patches for the equipment. So these are the few of the challenges from a the commercial, or the, I would say, operational point of view. But on the other side, from a technical standpoint, yes, your first part of your question, Sahar, was like how we should or how we can protect that kind of an environment. Of course, the concept of protection and applying the security remains the same in IT and OT space, that identify the weak points or the vulnerabilities, the loopholes through the risk assessments, through the penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and all that, and then start applying the required patches to close or address those vulnerabilities or weaknesses from a security standpoint. But additional element of that introduce several challenges here. One is that in order to assess the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in that kind of environments, required more sophisticated tools, which are not the same tools as which we use in the IT space. Those are too costly, and that brings and compound challenge of having that skilled people on ground, which are a very rare skill today. Anyone who claims to be cybersecurity OT professional, I think he will be handpicked by some of the big names in US today.
Even
So
the tools that you've mentioned, like you're saying that to test these systems, the tools that you should have available, these are not those tools that are generally available. I mean, like, in order to have those tools, you have to actually get it from those specialized markets, and you can have it from there. And even introducing them in your facility to test, there is always a risk that these tools may also have some certain vulnerabilities that can actually be introduced in your infrastructure while testing. So yes, again, it's a challenging part to still
exactly,
secure
and
this area.
such tools are not publicly available in a way that anyone can access that.
True.
If those are again very vendor specific tools, so if we take a name of a Honeywell as a vendor, we need to have the testing tools only from them to use it on their to operational components. If we are not able to use that, nobody will give an assurance to the company that and nothing can gonna go wrong. So that's exactly a bit of operational challenges. The human part challenges, as I said, like the finding the right skill set to apply or work in that, apply the cybersecurity to work in those kind of sophisticated environments. And the last part is that exposure to that kind of environments as well, because every OT environment is so unique to each other, that small, even the measures are different to each other. Even oil and gas standard, production standard for oil and gas varies country to country, and accordingly, in terms of measuring and reporting and everything. So my last point is that all that these things, if we combine, introduce the compound challenges in order to come up with that right resourceful strategy to rightly secure and protect critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. It's equally costly as well.
Hafisa, would you like to add anything before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, so we are talking about the challenges here and the kind of efforts that we can put back basically. So I will like to quickly summarize. If you talk about the challenges of securing, the critical infrastructure against the cyber threats. So you're when you're talking about, critical infrastructure, you're talking about complexity and the interconnectedness of the critical infrastructure, because these systems are usually highly complex. They involve multiple stakeholders like vendors sometimes, multiple technologies and across multiple networks. Securing these systems required comprehensive understanding and coordination across various sectors, which can be challenging due to the, I would say, the priority and the regularity frameworks sometimes as well. I believe one of the challenges, and in our case, if we look into, maybe there are sometimes legacy systems and legacy technology as well. So this is also one of the challenge. But the thing is, I believe the most important thing, if you talk about, and obviously the limited resources is one part, but I believe that if you talk about to prioritize or put some efforts, so the very first thing is we need to understand that what kind of problem is there, what kind of problem can be there. So I think risk assessment is a major thing. It should be the stepping stone that you need to prioritize your efforts in terms of securing the critical infrastructure, is to identify and address the most significant risk to ensure resilience. So I think risk assessment is one part, and then in this practice you can also classify your asset inventory that you have. Obviously, we talk about vulnerability management as well. But I believe there is one thing very important that usually, if I talk about at some organization level, and we have been practicing this a lot, that we conduct cyber security training and awareness. I think this is very important. Like I mentioned before, that people need to see that what can be the consequences, what are small steps that someone can take to help at a company level. So I believe the company need to realize that they need to invest in a training and awareness program of not only employee but the contractor as well sometime, because we are having here many contractor providing IoT solutions. So when it comes IoT, it comes with sensor and connectivity, and the game can be started from there. So this is very important, I think, because this helps you to identify the role and responsibility. So for example, if some vendor is coming to me and he would want to implement or do a POC of a IoT solution, so then I need to tell him that what are the limitations, or what is the network landscape of my company, right? And what are the SOPs for any vendor to establish a POC, for example, within my network, right? So I think sometimes you need to provide that awareness to the vendor as well. And definitely, I think collaboration and information sharing is very important. So not only at this level, but I believe that at at the level of different forums. Uh, at the national level, I maybe there should be a lot of collaboration in terms of putting efforts, basically.
You mentioned training and awareness sessions. I think that is the simplest and the most basic practice that can be implemented in public and private sector organizations to at least inform their employees the sort of gravity and seriousness of this topic, and to educate them and to prioritize safety of critical infrastructure. Abhisab, you touched upon a couple of topics which I was going to ask. One was, how can organizations prioritize their cybersecurity efforts within the critical infrastructure sector? And then what are some of the best practices for incident response and resilience planning in critical infrastructure organizations? So let's just we've heard from you. Let's move to Ahmad and Osama if they have anything to add on these points before we sort of move on to our final segment. Gee,
Sure, man. I was sorry. I was waiting for someone. So, what are the best practices generally, like, I mean, in any of the field of related to technology, especially considering the cybersecurity? We, of course, try to align our efforts with the leading practices. So, in the space of protection of the critical infrastructure, there is a standard which is generally being referred in order to align with the leading practices, our efforts and strategies. That's referred as IEC 62443, if anyone would like to refer. Because in generally in the IT space, we refer to ISO 27001 and similar kind of standards, NIST or CIS or OWASP. So this is a key standard for OT security, which is generally referred and gives the guidelines how to classify the information within that, how to categorize this different zoning in terms of OT space, because OT systems are also follow some set of, like, the internationally accepted guidelines, and there are different segments to that, such as our IT systems are directly connected with some sort of protocol converters, and they are talking to the PLCs. PLCs are further talking to the sensors which are deployed in down there into the operational plants. I'll give you a very common example here. Usually these days, it's very common that the car locks are we use the the wireless keys to open the lock. So that use a protocol which is very common protocol, which is Bluetooth. So if we know what sort of how they are connecting with each other and what how they are transmitting the signals, we can easily find a way around to sneak in or spoof that communication and try to open. So with the with one small a kiddish device which is called as rubber ducky these days, they go close to the car, they try to find the frequency, and they just click it and car is open. So that's one of the OT exploitation example. So similarly, the same concept applies there, but of course in a more organized and systematic fashion. So the very first, as Afisa very rightly highlighted, few of the the key strategies in order to secure any of the environment infrastructure. First is identify your key vulnerabilities in the system, come up with a roadmap how to address those gaps, assess the applicable or the required budgets, resources required, and start mitigating them. Most of the cases, when it comes to the OT security, we are depending on the vendors. So engagement of the vendors are important in terms of ensuring the security reaches to the reasonable level. And the last but not least is that, of course, the people who are responsible to secure the infrastructure are critical resources. So my request to all the business leaderships, whoever would be listening to our this webinar, is please do invest into your cyber professionals of your organization. They are very important resources to secure your business the way it is.
Usama, would you
Uh,
like to add anything?
Uh, yes, a little bit in terms of the incident response part that you've mentioned is, we all know about the basics of the incident response process, like, the identification of the incident, the containment part, then the recovery and all. But even if we go a little bit beyond that, we need to do the preparedness for that. Like, traditionally we used to call the business continuity plans, but in this similar scenario, we need to have, as Ahmed has mentioned, that the human life part is the most critical part. So for that, we need to have these sort of plans upfront. We should have upfront planning in place. Let's say, for example, if such incident happen, so how we actually, first of all, protect our people, then how we actually contain this critical infrastructure, how can we actually ensure that this particular area that got infected doesn't impact other connected systems, which, because if you're talking about the critical infrastructure, countries like Pakistan, which is not very much connected with other organization in country, but like, if we consider about the West, healthcare, social security, every other entity is actually connected to one another. So if one got compromised, there is a high probability that the infection can actually compromise the others as well. So yes, we should have the planning in place, the readiness something. One more thing is like, we can actually do the simulations or drills as well. Drills we cannot do in terms of real time, because obviously the infrastructure, we don't have the redundant infrastructure. But yes, the tabletop exercises, the readiness of the people. Let's say if something happens, so we put a scenario and see what are actually the responses and readiness level of the stakeholders that are actually involved in the process. So with this, we actually can prepare ourselves to better respond to such incidents.
Thank you. And I think this brings to my next question, which is actually more relevant for me being a lawyer, is that what role can the government play in regulating or sort of promulgating laws to ensure that critical infrastructure is protected from cyber attacks? I am aware that the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, they sort of they supervise, and there are some laws which have been promulgated to protect critical infrastructure, which comes under the domain of the PTA, the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. But this is sort of, I don't want to jump in as a lawyer. I think I will leave the floor to you as professionals for your input on the government's role in this area.
Yeah. I think this is very important part because we are talking about the critical infrastructure, and definitely government can play a major role in securing. So, for example, there should be some regulations and industry standards. I think that play crucial roles in enhancing the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure by establishing the minimum security requirements. uh, I would say promoting best practices and fostering the collaboration among stakeholders. So setting minimum security requirement. Uh, when you say that these requirements, maybe sometimes these are just the guidelines of securing network or protecting the sensitive data. So the thing is that the government can also help organization, or I would say it should start from building some entity that should take care within the government to promote best practices. So, for example, the government regulations often they can incorporate recognize cybersecurity best practices and framework like ISO or IEC 27001, for example, or CIS control. So these framework implementation that basically provide comprehensive guideline of identifying. I remember in my last organization, we did work on ISO 27001 certification, and believe you me, it's a very comprehensive exercise. So firstly, you need to be to be compliant, and then there is certain requirement that you get the certification for it. So I believe the government can play a critical role by, like obviously there need to be some entity that need to take control of this.
Just to add a little bit in this, that in terms of the legal requirements, we can say there should be something as Hafiz has mentioned, that there's something minimum baseline should be there. Then there should be some check and balance process. Like, say for example, if the entities, hosting the critical infrastructure, they're actually abiding by these standards or not. Because sometimes we say, let's say we are procuring a particular infrastructure, we have actually deployed it, but on a regular basis, are we actually complying to the regulatory requirements or not? So the regulations also dictate assessment on a regular basis of that particular critical infrastructure, to ensure that these are actually being patched on a regular basis. There's no such critical vulnerabilities associated to it, or maybe there is no such procurement that actually that is not compliant with these regulations. Considering, for example, considering a geopolitical situation, we are saying that will not be actually procuring a particular a piece of device from a particular country. So we just need to see, are we actually abiding to these laws or not? Because talking about my domain and banking sector, we used to have like very specialized products available, and they're top of the line, but they're actually associated with some of those countries which are actually not very close allies to the Pakistan. But so, these kind of things that we need to see, the regulatory requirements should actually dictates these part as well, and to ensure that regular assessment by our regulator or the government related entities, they should assess us, these entities, to ensure the compliance part.
Thank you. I have two questions before we round up today's discussion. One is, and I think Hafiz Saab sort of mentioned this a few minutes ago, that collaboration and information sharing among critical infrastructure sectors can improve cyber threat detection and response. I think that's sort of anybody would agree to this, but Ahmad or Osama, if you would like to add to this before I move on to my final question.
Ahmad sir, please.
Sure. So, from a regulator standpoint, and I'll just very shortly, if they focus their efforts on these 3 points, I think the overall industry can improve a lot. First is development of the um, contextualized and relevant standards and guidelines. Second thing is ensuring that they basically define such platforms for collaborations. And the third thing is, the what do you call ensuring the I'm sorry. The third thing is the one is the collaboration, one is the standards and guidelines, and I forgot the third one. But these 3 points are actually what their spectrum of focus should be. But as far as incident response is concerned, of course, regulators should take a part of uh, having a one common platform where they can share the intelligence. So the intelligence sharing in the cyber field in order to protect the critical infrastructure is very critical. If one facility is facing or witnessing an attack from of some foreign attack vector, they should be having some access to some platform where they can share that information, so that overall at the national level the incident response capability can be enhanced a lot.
Thank you. My final question is, what emerging technologies or trends are shaping the future of critical infrastructure protection from cyber attacks?
So, okay, if I may answer. So I would say the very famous would be AI and machine learning, because these technologies are being increasingly used, utilized for threat protection and anomalies detection. And also, machine learning give you a lot of capability of predictive analytics as well. these technology can analyze large volume of data in real time to identify the pattern, to detect anomalies and predict potential, basically, security threats. And the second that I would like to comment on is zero trust architecture. I think this is also very common, and many OEMs are now offering their services in zero trust architecture. I think being a service provider, maybe Ahmad can relate to this point that even the big names are now offering it, because it's a very simple approach that you know uh, you assume that there is no trust by default, so you don't trust anyone, right? So you go to very basic level, and you did that basically a kind of a framework that require verification, it validation of every user, every device, and network connection that is basically coming to access the critical infrastructure. So it emphasizes on the, I would say, granular access control and identity management, basically. Uh, so there are many others technologies, but I would give a room to other panelists to talk about those.
So, Osama, with your permission,
Yes, please.
yeah, thank you. So, so I remember the third point for the regulators as well. Just would like to add is the third point was related to regulating the supply chain. There should be regulations to control the vendors and their self hidden interest as well, so that they cannot exploit the weaknesses of the organizations. So coming back to this one is emerging technologies. I think in the context of our discussion today, the most important relevant as Hafiz mentioned on the foundational technologies, AI and cloud and all that, which are the backing technologies for IoT. What makes IoT from OT is just an inclusion of the additional sensors and the connectivity to the cloud. So it's basically the OT space within the smart, using the smart technologies. So if we, as emerging technologies, more technologies which are coming, it brings its own risks. So only the attack vectors changes, but though what technologies actually can help us, the protecting the critical infrastructure, yes. Similarly, the cloud, where we can basically share the centralized engine of intelligence and the intelligence feeds which we get from that tools, the cyber threat intelligence tools, that is from the globe. So that helps us, like, getting more focused and contextualized intelligence, so that we can prepare our incident response strategies in a respective way, rather than wasting time on R&D, or when we receive any malware, we don't need to waste our time to investigate the signatures and these kind of things. That's already there. Second thing is the enhanced use cases of with the help of AI. Our incident response orchestration can be automated, and automatically, that with the help of AI, the fundamental decisions can be taken in order to mitigate those risks, such as if a ABC port was left open, or the default passwords were left open, that can be eventually taken a decision to control that thing. So these are the few examples which basically can enhance our incident response mechanisms, though. But within the OT space, of course, it's very much still today. It is very much depending on two factors. One is that, of course, the people side of it, how skilled they are into that in that environments. And second thing is vendor part, how serious they are in order to help the organizations to act as a partner to mitigate those risks. Because in certain situations where they people find the weaknesses in their own systems, They do not have the patches or the mitigation controls for that. So they have to come up with that, all that. But and they are not open to share, the required information of their own proprietary tools with the other parties, so that they can work together as a forum to mitigate those efforts. So there are some industry specific challenges here in order to come up with the very right cost effective solutions to secure our critical infrastructure.
Okay, thank you for that comprehensive explanation. We've actually crossed our 1 hour mark as well. So, Sama, unless you would like to add anything, I'll just take leave. And thank you all for,
And I think we've covered almost everything,
yes,
the
we have.
industry collaboration part, the threat intelligence sharing. So almost covered this part.
No,
Just the
it's
last
been,
comment from my
yes.
side, Sahar. I think there was very critical discussion that Ahmed was doing. I think I would recommend that we need to invest in cybersecurity. Please invest in cybersecurity. This is very critical because people, they don't understand what can be the consequences. So sometimes I know, I give them an example that most of the organizations, they are sitting on a bomb, right? And it can it can blow them away any point in time. So please invest.
No, I was just going to say that I think this is a critical topic. We've had a serious, engaging discussion. I hope whoever l- was listening to us live or will listen to the recording later um, gains a lot of knowledge from this. And again, thank you very much to all of you for taking out the time today. It was a serious, heavy topic, and look forward to speaking with all of you on maybe the same topic or another topic in the next few days. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you. Bye.